we'll end up with a more toxic version of the Tories, a more hypocritical and draconian version of the Labour Party.
That's the thing that I believe Nigel selfishly, just denied the opportunity for Reform to do that.
Hello, welcome and thank you for joining. So I'm joined here by Howard Cox. Thank you very much for joining. So the intention really is to sort of have a bit of a discussion with yourself, your experiences really of politics, Reform UK in particular. And what I'm trying to do is really speak to some of the people from the grassroots level that have had their sort of experiences and negative experiences really with Reform UK. You're probably the most high profile person I intend on really speaking to and doing this with, but it is one of what I hope will be many more to come. So thank you very much, Howard, for joining. I think most of our audience will probably be familiar with who you are, but for those that aren't, I don't suppose if you don't mind giving us a quick summary of who you are and what you do.
Thank you very much, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's sad that we've got to talk this way in many respects in terms of why, with all the hopes and aspirations for a party that I decided to leave, but we'll get to that. I've been running a campaign since 2010 called Fair Fuel UK. Fundamentally, the British motorist is the highest taxed motorist in the world, or nearest damn it. And for the last 15 years, my campaign has kept fuel duty frozen. In fact, it's come down 10% since 2010. In that time, Rishi Sunak recently, when he was Prime Minister, introduced, in fact, when he was Chancellor, he actually introduced a 5p cut in fuel duty, which is temporary. And it won't be long before Rachel Thieves decides to actually increase it, probably in the budget coming up. And so I'm pretty busy still focusing on that. And it's this campaign that attracted Richard Tice to actually ask me to stand as London Mayor, because part of the campaigning I do is not just on taxation, it's also on things like ULEZ, LTNs and high parking charges, and you name it, all those sorts of things regarding the anti-driver policies of succession of governments. And I got to know Richard. I was a regular guest on his Sunday talk radio show. I was on for half an hour virtually every 3 or 4 weeks to talk about political issues related to the motorist. I got to know him, and he said to me one day after about 8 or 9 episodes we did together, why don't we have a coffee? And we had a coffee. And then he asked me quite bluntly, would I like to stand for London Mayor for Reform UK? And at that point, I thought, no, because for 15 years, I've been apolitical in this campaign. It has to be. Because there's a lot of, would you believe it, Liberal Democrat drivers and Labour drivers, you name it, there's loads of the buggers. But to put it bluntly, we went through this process, but Sadiq Khan was getting stupid. He had public consultations going on, which he ignored. 2 out of 3 people didn't want the ULEZ expansion in London. And I thought, well, perhaps this is a good way, standing for reform. And I knew very well that I had no chance of winning. London is sewn up completely, and it's going to get even more sewn up with the way Sadiq Khan is actually encouraging London to be basically anti-British. And so anyway, I finally said after 2 or 3 months to Richard, okay, I'll do it. And I was delighted to do it. And I met a lot of good reformers. And you mentioned that you want to talk to a lot of grassroots people. There's a hell of a lot of fantastic people in London who backed me, supported me, delivered leaflets from every corner of London, who I've got nothing but admiration and respect. And I thank them for what they tried to do. It's sad to some extent that a lot of them are still hypnotised by, Nigel Farage. What he says goes, no matter what he says, it must be right. And anyway, I didn't get elected. And by the way, when I was standing, Nigel wasn't leader. Richard Tice was leader, and Ben Habib was deputy leader. And I had no reason to believe, that Nigel would become leader at that point. But if he had become leader, I think we would have got more people in the assembly. We only got one person, that's Alex Wilson. I gave up my first place to become stand at the Assembly for him. So I could have been sitting in there now, but I'm not bothered by that. I'm not that precious about that sort of thing. But anyway, then along came Sunak after the London mayoral election to say he's calling a general election, and suddenly Nigel appeared, and loads of people were discarded when he became his leader, including people like Ben Habib, who I've got nothing but the highest respect for. I'm very friendly and close to him, and I hope to be working with him in the coming years. But anyway, I at that point I stood for become MP down in Dover and Deal. I was offered 3 places. I was still reasonably well received by the Reform hierarchy, and I was offered 3 different constituencies. And to cut a long story short, I decided why not take the. In fact, Nigel actually called me and said, "Take Dover, Howard, because that's the front line of immigration, and it'd be a good one for you. And I know you'll do well down there." As it happens.
Absolutely, I think this is the heart of the issue, where the videos come in daily now of hundreds of illegal migrants coming through Dover. So definitely a very high profile, 2 campaigns, the seat in Dover as well as the London mayoral campaign as well that you was there for. Going back to the London mayoral campaign that you had. What sort of support did you have from the party? I mean, that was obviously, as an upstart insurgent party, quite a high profile set of campaign, and that you would imagine that they would want to be jumping all over that in the run up to what will be the general election soon on the horizon.
Well, you've obviously read my mind. I was going to come on to that, but certainly we go back to the London mayoral campaign. I had little or no support. I mean, there was very little money thrown at things, little things like we had access to the big double-decker bus, and they did paint my face on the side of it, and we drove it around a little bit of London. But when we asked for it for 8 times, and 7 times we didn't get it because it was used somewhere else, etc. And I thought, hang on a second, this is pretty much a high-profile campaign. And in terms of finance and money, etc., we didn't have the major top people. People like Richard, I have to say, people like Lee Anderson, all those sorts of people, and the people in headquarters, Reform headquarters. And this is an example. On the day I was going for election, where you'd expect the candidate Reform would have a lot of cameras around him to be photographed at the ballot box in Westminster. And I thought that was to happen. I got up to London that day at 6 o'clock. Bear in mind, I didn't live in London. I am a Londoner. I've worked in London. I'm in London virtually every day. My family's in London. All sorts of things about London you couldn't take away from me. I'm a true Londoner. But on that day, I went to the headquarters. There was no one there at Reform headquarters in Victoria. I knocked on the door. No one answered. I thought, what's going on here? And I rang and I called. No one was about at all. I said, okay, well, fine. So I walked down to Westminster to deliver my vote. And the only person that did turn up there was a certain Rupert Lowe. And I will always be grateful for that. And he was fantastic. He took photographs. He did all those sorts of things and pushed it out on social media. I was standing there. We went for a coffee afterwards, and he was disgusted by Reform headquarters and the leadership there. At that point, he was a big fan of Nigel's. He said it's good news that Nigel's running, or Nigel will be possibly running. At that point, we didn't know, but there was strong vibes coming from Nigel's office to say that I think he might be dipping his toe into the political waters again. So, in answer to your question, I got very little support, both financially and certainly personally. We did make some nice videos, all the slick. There's a team of people, and I know lots of the people in headquarters, they're still there, who basically are at the beck and call of Nigel for when he needs them. Anyway, I stood down in Dover. I actually came second. I got 23% of the vote in just 3.5 weeks. There's no doubt about it. If I had another month, I think I would have sneaked it. The guy that won it is a guy called Mike Tapp, and and he's a bit of a sycophant for Keir Starmer. So, but he shook my hand. He said, "Howard, you ran a great election." He did well, but he was campaigning for 2.5 years, and I was campaigning for 3.5 weeks. the only person that came down and stood and talked on my behalf then was Anne Widdecombe, who's a good friend. I've known Anne for a long time. She was sick to death how I was treated. She keeps a low profile and making comments about what's good or bad about reform. Understandably so. But deep down, if I had another drink with him, she'd be very kind and loyal to, or loyal is the wrong word, but certainly supportive of what I did, both in London and in Dover. One of the things, I should have been alerted to this. On the day that Nigel announced that effectively he was standing for leadership, he did it in Dover, and he did it in the Dover Yacht Club.
And, I remember. Yeah, watching that. Yeah.
And I was asked by one of his fledglings to actually, could I come and introduce him? It made sense. I was candidate down for Dover and Deal, that the candidate should do it. Anyway, we met down there, and in the notional green room before we went in, Nigel suddenly turned around. And I've known Nigel for a long time. I wouldn't class him as a good friend, but I regard him as a friend. He's got a lot of respect for what I've done in terms of campaigning. But he stood there and with the photographs being taken of him, and I was being slowly but surely pushed aside. I could feel it, and my wife noticed it more than anything. And anyway, we discussed how was that day going to actually, in terms of the presentation to the media down there, and it was filled to the rafters with the top media down there. Chris Mason, BBC, all the Sky there, Bev Turner, all that. Not Bev Turner. What's her name? The Sky girl. Anyway.
Beth Rigby.
That's the one. Thank you very much indeed. They're all down there, and he said, Howard, no, you won't introduce me. Don't worry about that. We don't need you to do that. And the only person that stood in my corner was Gawain Towner.
Yeah.
And Gawain's been with the side of Nigel since all the days of UKIP, and going way back. And he said, no, it makes sense. He's standing there. And finally, Nigel was convinced to do it. But I was told in no uncertain terms not to say much. I did. I introduced, and it's very, I should have seen the writing on the wall then, that, I wasn't being taken seriously. And I was a bit of a gimmick for them, and, a bit of a guinea pig for them to play about with. We're hearing lots of other people standing in London Mayor. I think there's 2 or 3 people standing for reform at the moment, and Middleton, all these sorts of people. And as I've said always with Nigel, he seeks billionaires and celebrity status. That's what he does. That's his life. So in a nutshell, politically, for reform, for 2 years of my life, I gave it my all. I'm 70 years of age now, and I gave every single hour of the day, 7 days a week virtually, to reform. And I will go on to a bit further how I was treated next.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, do you think that was the start then of I suppose the writing on the wall for how it was going, or did that come later?
Well, what happened in August of last year, 2024? Obviously, we now have a Labour government, and I was effectively sought after just to talk about reform issues. Usual places, GB News, Talk TV. The usual slightly right of centre media places, which I was happy to talk about. But I did have a bad taste in my mouth, and it came about big time when I was asked about Tommy Robinson. And Tommy Robinson, who I didn't know from Adam. All I did know was he was actually highlighting the problems and the issues of the child rape gangs across the country. And forgetting about his background, I didn't give a damn. What his issue, what he was fighting for, I had a lot of respect for, as does Rupert Lowe, as does Ben Habib, as do millions of other people of which voted reform. Loads of people have respect for him. But at that point, I didn't realise there were such deep-seated issues and problems. The English Defence League, it all goes back a long way. And Nigel and him are crossed swords, amongst other people, apparently. And Tommy was persona non grata big time. And anyway, I spoke on a Dan Wootton show, a podcast thing or whatever you call it. He's really doing well. And he asked, what did I feel about Tommy Robinson? I said exactly what I just said. I don't know him, but I got a lot of respect for what he's trying to do. At that point, I all the way till February of this year or January of this year of 2025, not one Reform headquarters person spoke to me. Not one.
Wow. So they just completely, cut off all communications, didn't mention anything, just that you were excommunicated basically from that point.
Yeah, completely. I was absolutely amazed that, for someone in a high profile electoral position, the immigration slot in Dover and of course London Mayoral. And bear in mind, Sadiq Khan only got elected on 18% of the vote.
Yeah.
I got 3%, and we did lose our deposit, which I was very upset and disappointed about. But it wasn't down to me. It's down to the fact is that there is no way Reform was going to be elected in London at that stage. No one. It doesn't matter. It would be impossible. But we could have made a better fist of it and got 3 or 4 more people elected on the Assembly. And that's the thing that I believe Nigel selfishly, just denied the opportunity for Reform to do that. And lots of those sorts of signals. But anyway, I was told, I know in certain ways, that in January, because of my support, and I spoke at various events to do with Tommy, the first one came quite seriously from Richard Tice in a WhatsApp message to me, which said this: Howard, you seem to be taking a different journey to us. If you can continue to talk about Tommy Robinson, you will be expelled from the party. Wow. And I said, what's your problem with this? And then all of a sudden there was an effort, a concentrated effort to basically make me look an idiot. And I'm the bad guy in all of this. That interview I did with Dan Wootton back in August, 4 or 5 months earlier to when I left, was suddenly being brought to the fore to Nigel, because people like Chris Hope on GB News said, I understand Howard has left the party. Why is that? He said, well, he did say something stupid, didn't he, to Dan Wootton and all that sort of thing. That was 5 months before. They could have spoken to me then, 5 months earlier, say, what the hell's this about? And it's because, and I spoke to Ben Habib about this text from Richard Tice. And he said very kindly, he said, Howard, it's your decision, mate, but if I were you, I'd resign. And I sat down with my wife over a glass of vino and said, was this last 2 years worth it? As it happens, the campaigning aspect of it, because I'm still campaigning like mad for the motorist, it did give me, but there was a huge divide, the Tommy Robinson, and I've got 1.7 million supporters, motorists, who've signed up since 2010. Yeah. And I had about 6,000 or 7,000 when they saw my support for Tommy Robinson. They left, but I got 30,000 that joined up. So that's the difference, this sort of thing. And I said to Nigel, I said to everyone, look, I don't know what this is about between you, but I'm not going to judge Tommy. I don't know him. The only way I'm going to know him is I'm going to ask to see him. So I went to see him in prison. I spent 2 hours with Tommy, and what an inspirational man he is, and what he was put through. I wouldn't put on my worst enemy what happened, and don't forget that there was also that point that Richard Tice did also say in various speeches. He said when he was asked about Tommy Robinson, he said, "We want nothing to do with them or that lot." If you remember that.
No, I do remember. I mean. This complete alienation of thousands of people that vote Reform, that are there, in support, regardless of whether you're a supporter of Tommy or not. They're the people that are supporting the party, and you've just alienated a huge chunk of them. So I was a bit taken aback by the complete lack of understanding for what was their base then. I mean. Obviously, the party now, I would argue, is unrecognisable from what it was because I was the candidate for Braintree. So I would say that the way the party is now is obviously completely unrecognisable from where it was then. And I've really sort of entrenched those deep set issues that they've had against the people that they would call detractors. In fact, I was, that they labelled, Ben Habib and yourself and Tommy, in conversations I've had with various people within Reform HQ and leadership, as detractors, and that is what they refer to. Any whisper or mention of the name Tommy Robinson, Ben Habib, or yourself, I'm afraid, provokes serious repercussions from the leadership. And in many cases, they handle it in the way in which you described. They just cut off communications, don't talk to anybody, which is really quite bizarre, to be honest with you.
I find it very sad. It does bring a lump to my throat about there are so many people I've met who really care passionately. If we look at the policies, okay, they're a bit wafer thin, but effectively the contract with the people, and I wrote a lot of the transport stuff in there, like the 20p cut in fuel duty we want, etc. And the £20,000 tax starting, that sort of thing, the quantitative easing, not paying interest and all the money of the Bank of England. There's some cracking stuff in there, really good, yeah. Except it's slowly acquiesced now to moving to almost a liberal position. We're not talking about mass deportation. I have to give Sarah, from Runcorn, she came out today in PMQs calling for a ban on the burqa. And congratulations to her for coming out that. But immediately, Nigel is telling the party not to alienate Muslim folk. And hang on, what's going on here? What about the British? Yeah. What about, and this, I'm not, and don't forget, we're also equated to being far right thugs, all those sorts of things. And there's nothing far right about me at all. I mean, I can't believe what I've done for the last 15 years is nothing but just try and help small businesses and motorists and drivers, not being ripped off at the pumps. That's all I've done. I'm a Thatcherite at heart. Should be turning in a grave seeing what's going on at the moment. But what we're seeing now is we've got, the only reason I left, and I never actually was a member of the Tory party, but for 13, 14 years, I worked with some great backbenchers trying to stop fuel duty, some brilliant people. And they've lost their seat because of Sunak's rush to, get a general election, which he didn't need to do. And we might not be in this situation now. And the only reason Nigel and Reform UK are walking on water at the moment is because the Tories are so bad and Labour are even worse. And
that's what I was about to ask you. I mean, do you think that this, what I would describe as a big lurch to the left for Reform UK, do you think people buy it, or do you think that people are so desperate because of the fact that they can't stand Labour with the way that their vindictive sort of policies and talking down of Great Britain, and then you obviously have the Conservatives' disastrous last 14 years bringing the country to its knees? So do you think that Reform, by nature, is the only alternative, and people, I suppose, are turning to it for that reason?
Yeah, if we had a general election tomorrow, I'd say vote Reform. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I still, at the heart of me, partly because there are some bloody good people in Reform and they've worked hard and they've really basically carried Nigel to this peak of popularity. And that's what it is. It seems to be a beauty contest at the moment, and he's the less ugly of the alternatives. And I had several dinners with Nigel over the last 2 or 3 years and met with him several times. And the first time I met him really was about 10 years ago at the European elections he was involved with. And he was very supportive of Fairfield UK. He said, we've got to look after the motorists. Well, no one's spoken about the motorists anymore. If you listen to Reform now, even since I've left, there's not one mention of fuel duty or all the issues, even things like I invented a thing called Pump Watch, which the Tories have bought into. And what that is making sure we're not being ripped off the pumps by profiteering oil companies. When oil goes up, the pump prices go up like a rocket, and when the oil prices come down, they come down like a feather. Those are the sorts of things. And I invented a thing called Pump Watch, and needs to say papers like the Sun are taking credit for it as well. But I work with the Sun a little bit, and that's a little war of attrition I have with them about who's actually responsible for this. But what I'm saying is that they seem to have lurched, even to the extent where yes, he's talking about net zero is a bad thing. But he should be talking about net zero being a bad thing for grassroots people. It shouldn't be about just being a popular thing, just because Kemi Badenoch, who's contacted me and spoken to me, and the Conservatives want me to work with them, by the way, on this. I'm not working with anyone at the moment, except I'm waiting for, how Ben is actually formulating his vision, which I believe is a vision that I share for the future. So Nigel, to me, you asked the question, people got no choice, and that's where we are at the moment. But we are 3.5, 4 years out of an election, to cut a long story short, Starmer can do anything. He can lie, and he'll still be Prime Minister in a year or two's time. I can't see anyone take him down. I can't see Angela Rayner and becoming Prime Minister. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I am. But the last thing we want is a quick election to put Nigel in place, because I think Nigel will be a disaster for this country.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, do you think that it's down to Nigel alone, or do you think that there's more? I mean, where does reform go now? I mean, there's not really a mechanism in place to remove, many people within the leadership team. But is there any way of salvaging what reform stood for to where it is now? Is there a route back for it in the eyes of the direction of what the vision of what we saw and campaigned for?
Richard, you're a very astute character, and when I resigned, obviously there's a fair bit of press around me for why I did it and everything. And one of the things I said, Nigel is the consummate professional, the most brilliant communicator. There's not many people who can stand up on the stage without notes and effortlessly convey feeling, and he's a great hypnotist. He's a genius at it. But I challenged him when I left. You're so popular. You keep boasting. At that point, it's 150,000 members or something. Now it's 200,000 or whatever. It doesn't tell you how many have left, but signed up. But 200,000 members. Why not put the vote to them who should be leader? And then, if you get the mandate for that, no one's going to argue. No one's going to take it away from you. At the moment, it's still owned by two people, and that's Zia Youssef, the chairman, and he never even spoke to me when he came on in, I think it was July last year. You think the first thing you do is come and talk. So at that point, I wasn't contentious or a problem to them, but he could easily have picked up the phone. Oh, let's have a beer and have a chat. What's your experiences? But no, I don't know what happened. I haven't got any idea whatsoever. And obviously, with Ben going, and there are great people like David Ball. I mean, he's still loyal to them. Gawain's still loyal to them, but they've been pushed aside. Paul Oakton, where's he gone? I'm not suggesting they're great people or bad people. All I know is the way they've just been, summarily dismissed out of sight since Zia's come on with his £200,000 injection of cash, and I don't know what's happening. Dare I say it? Also, he is a Muslim. There's lots of things going on trying to get the vote, and at the moment, there's no doubt about it. Hands down, they'd win 300 or 400 seats. Easily win it. But I don't think that's going to happen. You asked that question just now about, fundamentally, my point is that they'd win now. But I think as people get to learn about how Nigel operates and how the party operates and how dictatorial they are, I think we're in for a back to a three-way battle.
Well, I mean, I was just about to ask you, what do you think the biggest thing that the grassroots probably don't know about the party? And I think you've answered it really with that. I don't think they quite understand how dictatorial and draconian they actually are. I mean, to my knowledge, no other party makes the sort of branch officers or the equivalents sign NDAs. We'll end up with a more toxic version of the Tories, more hypocritical and draconian version of the Labour Party. But perhaps that's maybe something that will come to light maybe with some of these sessions that I plan on doing with a few others. I'm aware of time, Howard, for what we've been discussing here. So I can just say thank you very much for your time. And I hope to continue this discussion with a few more people. But yeah, thank you very much. To be continued.
Thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure.